A couple adopted a child from the Ukraine who they thought was 6 years old. The story of Natalia Grace Barnett, Part 2. Where does the truth lie? Let's talk about it. This is Criminal Justice Corner, where we discuss true crime stories. We give the real details surrounding what occurred, and just in case you find yourself in the same situation, we give you actionable advice and tips on how you can potentially get yourself out. I'm Dr. Jennifer Matthews, the host of the Criminal Justice Corner. I have 16 years of experience in the field of criminal justice and a doctoral degree in criminal justice. I am also an expert in video evidence. Let's talk about the Natalia Grace story. Now, I have previously done a podcast episode of the Natalia Grace story, but after watching the Natalia Grace documentary on the ID Network channel, and getting several comments on my first episode on YouTube, I wanted to do a follow-up. So on that documentary, there was a lot of information that came out, and I wanted to do this follow-up because I wanted to address a lot of things that were in there. Mainly, let's start with the comments that I received. So a lot of people had opinions about what I said, and I really want to stress that they were opinions. We are all entitled to our opinions. It does not mean that they're right. It does not mean that they are wrong, but they are definitely that. They're opinions. My opinion might not be what yours is. Your opinion might not be what mine is. But guess what? We're all entitled to our opinion. So just because you feel strongly one way about something and I might feel strongly one way about another thing, it still is my opinion. And as long as we're respectful about those opinions, we can all get along. And that's something that I really want to stress here. We're all allowed to say what we want, but we should always be respectful when we're giving our opinion. And that's something that I'm always doing. And I'll always say allegedly, and I'll always give the facts that I am able to research and find. But they are opinions at the end of the day. When I'm giving them, I'm always saying allegedly. And if you're making a comment, if you weren't there, I'll say that. If you were not there, if you're not Natalia Grace, if you're not Christine, if you're not Michael, you're giving your opinion. So when you're making a comment, keep in mind, it's your opinion. Just like now, I'm going to give my opinion on what I saw on the ID Network documentary. So again, let's dive in. So when I watched the documentary, they started out with Michael giving his side of the story of what went down in his opinion. Again, this is his side of the story. Now, he was actually there. So he was telling how he felt living with Natalia Grace. And I find it really interesting because he depicted how he felt living with her in that first, I saw it in like 2-hour increment, in that first 2-hour increment. But in the last 2-hour increment, then he talked about the alleged abuse that Natalia Grace was perpetrated against her by his wife, Christine. So to me, it was like a contrast because in the beginning, he was saying how much he loved his wife, Christine. But then at the end of that documentary, the third part, he was talking about how she was quote unquote a monster, and how hard it was to live with her and the things that allegedly she had his children subjected to, and things quote unquote that Natalia was subjected to. So to me, that was a far contrast. I'm not saying he's telling the truth. I'm not saying he is lying, but I just found that was a huge contrast for me, considering that in the beginning, he was saying all of these nice things about their happy home. So if maybe she changed, people do change. I see that. I can understand that. But to me, that would be a drastic change. I always feel like there are red flags that show in the beginning. Yes, sometimes we overlook them. Sometimes they are subtle. But for her to become so abusive in his words, I feel like that would be a drastic change that should have been showing prior to the end of their marriage. So if that's what he's saying. So in the beginning, that's what he was saying, that it was very difficult for him living with Natalia. She was doing all of these abusive things to him, their family, defecating in the car. They couldn't go anywhere. She was being abusive to their children. She was being abusive to, neighbors' kids and kids she was playing with, and she was lying and she was evil. Let him tell it, and things of that nature. And then you fast forward to like the middle part of the documentary where they moved to Canada and they put her in this apartment and they left her, according to the documentary. And the neighbors of this apartment complex, they were able to see that she was left alone. And sometimes the family brought her food allegedly, and then sometimes the family did not buy her food allegedly. And a lady, I forget her name, she was overseeing Natalia. And then once Michael caught wind of that, then he would intervene and try and keep Natalia away from this woman, and they would kind of coax her into what to say. So to me, that was very manipulative. And you could even tell that she was being manipulated because they were always recording her. And I was like, what parent records their child? That definitely didn't make any sense to me. So they were doing that. And then, so we know that the parent, at least Michael, from what I could see, was recording her and telling her different things and asking her different questions. And I feel like they were leading questions at that point. But I also found it very interesting that the neighbors would all say she was out of line or overstepping her boundaries. So to what degree that she was doing that, I don't know if it was because she was quote unquote a child or why she was doing that. Maybe because she was lonely. Maybe that was the reason that she would do that. But if someone tells you, let's say, don't come into my home when I'm not there, then that's something that you have to respect. Maybe because, quote unquote, she was a child, that she did not understand that she should not be doing that. But I mean, if it's a door and it's closed, you should clearly knock on it before you enter. And then they were saying that she would call, the different families excessively and things of that nature. And she would do it, to the point where they'd have to say, hey, we're with our family, or we're out at an outing. Please don't keep calling us. And then they were saying she was kind of like stalking them to the point where she had to call the police on herself. So all of these behaviors were excessive. And to me, she needed some kind of intervention. What type of intervention at that point, I'm not really sure, because there was no oversight of her. So even though she was, quote unquote, an adult in the Christine and Michael's eyes, but in her, I would say in her biological age, based on her birth mother's age, she still needed some type of oversight. And so that was like the big question mark. So we know that her birth mother, they gave her a DNA test, and her birth mother was born in 1979. So that would have made Natalia a child at the time that she was living in that apartment complex. So just based off of that, she definitely needed some oversight, but also she needed some type of intervention as far as just lines of boundaries. And then the building manager did say that she was getting complaints about Natalia from different residents. And even she was like touching the kids inappropriately. And even Michael referenced when she was put in I believe it was like an institution or something like that for a time, that those nurses and things and the doctors were saying that she was making sexual advances to the male residents and things of that nature. So to me, I was really just wondering, like, where does she get that type of behavior from? Where does she even get that type of knowledge from if she was a child? So she has to be exposed to something at some point in time. Where, when, I don't know, but it's all suspicious. Like, where is all this coming from? So I really was confused by that. And it just again begs the differ to my question, where does the truth lie? So at no point in this documentary on ID Network did Christine appear. There were several pictures of her. There were several references of her, but at no time did she appear in the documentary. And I felt like that was very telling. Now, the son Jacob, he did appear in the documentary, and we know that he is the one who was the boy genius originally in the family. Now he admitted when he thought his mic was off, that there was a time when Natalia, I'm going to say allegedly, was kicked down some stairs. Now, at no point in time should any person, whether they're a child, whether they are an adult, should any person, any human being be abused. So that's never okay. I don't care who it is. No one should be abused. So whoever that perpetrator was, because the son wanted to say who it was, he did not want to incriminate his mom. So I'm not going to say that that's who it was, but no person should be abused. And if Natalia suffered that type of abuse, that is not okay. Whether she was an adult, whether she was a child, no one should be abused. And then there were also talks about alleged beatings of Natalia. That's not okay either. No one should be abused, whether they're an adopted, whether they're a birth child, whether they're young or old. No one should ever be abused for any reason. That is not okay. Now, at one point in time in the documentary, she did sit down for a forensic interview, and that was in September of 2019. Now, she was asked questions about her abuse, like if she suffered any abuse, and she made several conflicting statements. Now, I thought that was really interesting because me personally, if I've experienced some abuse, I'm going to shout it from the rooftops. Now, even if I've suppressed it, now I'm going to kind of try and jog my memory. Maybe it might be dormant, but I'm going to try. That's just me, because I've experienced different things of that nature. So I'm going to try to see what I can remember. That's what I'll say to that. Now with Natalia, when she was asked these questions, she was saying, well, I was never abused. And then she went back to say, well, I did suffer some abuse by Christine, and it just kind of seemed coerced, like she was forced in a way to say these things, like it wasn't really in her own words. So I'm not sure if she was like traumatized, or if she felt like if she said something that she would be, retaliated against, or if, she would suffer repercussions if she talked about it. Now, she does go on to say that the boys whooped her. Now, for me personally, I find it hard to believe children beating another child. However, I was not there. So these are her words. This is what she's saying. This is her point of view. That's what she said in the forensic interview. She also goes on to say that Jacob dropped her. And again, I was not there. So these is Natalia's words. So it just seemed hard to believe. I'll say that. Was I there? No. So I'm just going to say that's what she said. But it's just, I find it interesting. I don't know if she told anybody prior to that forensic interview, but I would hope she would have, so that could have been investigated. Next, I want to talk about like how she was like bounced from home to home. So that in itself is traumatic. So I'm sure she has issues trusting people now. And then also I felt my heart went out to the son Jacob, because I could tell that he was very conflicted in the interview. Like he wanted to say some things, but he was conflicted about what he should say, how he should say it, because he didn't want to get anyone in trouble, whether it be himself, whether it be his mom, whether it be his dad. He was very conflicted on what he should say, how he should say it, and how much he should say. And that had to be difficult for him because he was stuck in between a rock and a hard place because he lived in that house. He knew what went on, but he did not want to incriminate anybody or get anybody in further trouble. So that was difficult to watch too. But for Jacob, my heart went out to him, but I will say this. Listening to Jacob, I believed everything he said because I felt like he did not have a dog in that race. I felt like if anyone was telling the truth throughout the entire documentary, it was Jacob. Now, Natalia said some things to me that were questionable, but that was her truth. And then I felt like Michael said some things in the documentary that was questionable, but that was his truth. But for me, in listening to Jacob, I felt like he told the truth throughout the documentary. And again, that's my opinion. Now, when he talked about his guilt, the guilt that he felt about being with Natalia and doing different things to her, like he said his mother allegedly told him to pee on her bed and he felt guilty about that. I could totally see that guilt on his face when he said that. Now, people are saying that Christine manipulated the situation, but what about the people at her apartment, at the apartment complex? They all said that they were afraid of Natalia. For me, that was huge. These are adults. These are grown adults going about their daily lives, and they're saying that they are afraid of Natalia. She's just one person. And all these different people are saying, hey, I'm afraid of her. And they're making reports to the building manager saying that they're afraid of Natalia. And they were all happy to see her go. That's huge. That is huge. They were afraid to have their children around her at the apartment complex. The neighbors of Christine and Michael were afraid to have their children around her. All of that is huge to me. I think that is huge revelations, whether what Michael said is true, whether what any of these therapists that evaluated her said were true. These people at the apartment complex did not know what happened to her when she lived with Michael and Christine, but they were bona fide scared of her. That, to me, that spoke volumes. And again, it begs the question, where does the truth actually lie? Because they did make some statements that she said this to them, she said that to them, and they didn't even know what to believe. So again, it's hard to believe. It's hard to know what to believe. I'll say that. And then towards the end of that documentary, like I said, they did do a DNA test of the mom, and of course they had her birth certificate, and it shows that she was born in 1979, which does, make it so that Natalia is actually the age that she says she was all along. So, I mean, I don't know what to say as far as, her bones. They were saying originally her bones were larger than the other girls in the documentary at first. When they compared them to the other 6-year-old girl, and then the other doctor said that she was experiencing a form of dwarfism that was only diagnosed in adults. So it's like, what do you say to that? So there are a lot of discrepancies throughout this entire case that begs the question, where does the truth lie? Now, I'm not going to say that she's a kid. I'm not going to say that she's an adult, but what I will rely on is the science. Her mom, based on DNA, was born in 1979. That's what I'm basing my facts on, because that could be proven. That's scientific proof right there. So I stand on that. And again, there were a lot of conflicting statements, but based on the mom's DNA test, the mom was born in 1979, so that would make Natalia a child when she was abandoned at the apartment complex. And that's my take on it. Everything else is opinion, because it can't be proven. And what happened in the house, only the people in the house know for sure. And we don't know 100% where the fault lies, because we know Michael was acquitted. We know Christine was acquitted. And there's been embellishments on all sides. And again, my heart goes out to Jacob. And I hope that Natalia gets some therapy so that she can heal from whatever she's experienced, because she was in foster care majority of her life, if not all of her life. And then Jacob gets some therapy so that he can heal from what he's experienced. And I just wish the best for everybody involved. And you can find me, your host, Dr. Matthews, on Instagram at Dr. Jennifer Matthews, and the podcast Criminal Justice Corner on IG. Please comment, like, subscribe, and share. Tell a friend to tell a friend about Criminal Justice Corner podcast. I will see you next time on Criminal Justice Corner. New episodes are posted every Wednesday. Thank you for listening.